Okay, once again, we'll turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 7. This time we'll begin reading with verse 17. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, read verses 17 through 35. But as God hath distributed to every man, as the Lord hath called every one, so let him walk. And so ordain I in all churches. Is any man called being circumcised? Let him not become uncircumcised. Is any called in uncircumcision? Let him not be circumcised. Circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing. In other words, they're secondary, they're not primary. But the keeping of the commandments of God. Let every man abide in the same calling wherein he was called. Art thou called, being a servant? Care not for it. There's that word care again. For it, but if thou mayest be made free, use it rather. For he that is called in the Lord, being a servant, is the Lord's free man. Likewise also, he that is called being free is Christ's servant. You are bought with a price. Be not ye the servants of men. Brethren, let every man, wherein he is called, therein abide with God. Now now he's going to address this question. Virgins, I have no commandment of the Lord. Yet I give my judgment as one that hath obtained mercy of the Lord to be faithful. I suppose, therefore, that this is good for the present distress. I say that it is good for a man so to be. Art thou bound unto a wife? Seek not to be loosed. Art thou loosed from a wife? Seek not a wife. But if thou marry, thou hast not sinned, and if a virgin marry, she hath not sinned. Nevertheless, such shall have trouble in the flesh, but I spare you. But this I say, brethren, the time is short. It remaineth that both they that have wives be as though they had none, and they that weep as though they wept not, and they that rejoice as though they rejoiced not, and they that buy as though they possessed not, and they that use this world as not abusing it, for the fashion of this world passeth away. But I would have you without carefulness. He that is unmarried careth for the things that belong to the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But he that is married careth for the things that are of the world, how he may please his wife. There is a difference also between a wife and a virgin, or between a married woman and an unmarried. The unmarried woman careth for the things of the Lord, that she may be holy both in body and in spirit. But she that is married careth for the things of the world, how she may please her husband. And this I speak for your own profit, not that I may cast a snare upon you, but for that which is comely, and that you may attend unto the Lord without distraction. Again, there are several exhortations in this passage, all leading to that you may attend, be established. That's what that means, to attend, to be established upon the Lord without or free from distraction, free from diversion, free from interference. And again, that's the main idea behind all the exhortations. So it is, don't allow life to get in the way of your attention and focus upon God. Don't let life impede, hamper your relationship with God. Don't allow life to distract you from your duty to God, your service to God. Do not allow life to come between you and God. And that is a very real and prevalent danger for the child of God, that life get in the way of serving the Lord. Again, in the text, verse 32 and 34, there are the things that belong to the Lord. And there are the opposite of that, verse 33 and 34, the things that are of the world. And there is the constant danger that the child of God allows the things of the world to overshadow, to get in the way of the things of the Lord. Now, the Corinthian church had fallen prey to this danger. Paul told them 3 times in chapter 3, verses 1 and verse 3, that they were carnal. And that was the root of all their problems. It was a church that had many problems, but if they would have taken care of that one problem, you're carnal, the other problems would have been solved. So that was the root problem. And the question in verse 3 of chapter 3, are ye not carnal and walk as men? Walk as men. That defines what is meant by carnal. You walk as men. They were fleshly. They were worldly minded. They were absorbed with worldly matters. Their way of thinking, their views, their attitudes, their emotions, their lives were more in line with the things that are of the world than the things that belong to the Lord. In other words, they had become their surroundings, and their aspirations and their pleasures and their satisfaction and their security and their pursuits were in the world rather than in the things of the Lord. And Paul, in this passage, 1 Corinthians 7, gives exhortation for the purpose that you may attend, be established upon the Lord, free from distraction, free from diversion and interference. So, these exhortations are given to warn us of the danger and also how to overcome the danger. So our subject this afternoon is overcoming distraction in the service of the Lord. Someone might say, well, you just don't think about certain things. Well, that doesn't work. How do you get there? There are some foundational principles that are laid out in this passage. Verse 17, these are things we must always keep in mind. We are here to serve God. Verse 17, but as God hath distributed, and it says God has given, as God has imparted to every man, as the Lord hath called, appointed, so let him walk. That is, in that sphere of life that the Lord has called him to, in that particular realm. So we are reminded that not everyone has the same situation. Not everyone has the same circumstance. Not everyone has the same position in life. But none of that matters, because that's not the main thing. Serving the Lord is the main thing. From verse 18 and 19, we're reminded, again, circumcision and uncircumcision, that not everyone has the same background. Not everyone has the same background. In verses 21 and 22, we are reminded that not everyone has the same occupation. Not everyone has the same status. And he uses the example of one who had the occupation of a servant. That is, a slave. And he says in verse 21, art thou called being a servant? That is, this is your position in life. You are a slave. Care not for it. That is, let it not be a subject of deep anxiety and distress. Do not let it affect your spirits. Do not let that be your overriding concern, because that's secondary. Your position in life is secondary. The primary thing is serving the Lord. So he says, but if thou mayest be free. Okay, so you're a slave, but now one day you have the opportunity to be free. He says, use it. That is, avail yourself of such. But again, the key is the last two words of verse 22, whether you remain a slave or whether you are set free, you are Christ's servant. You are Christ's servant. So it's like this in modern day terms. You have a job. Someone offers you another job. Whether you keep your present job or take the new job really isn't the main issue. The main issue is whether you stay with your present job or take the new job. You're Christ's servant either way. You're to serve God either way. That's the primary thing. The job is not the primary thing. In our text, being a slave or being free is not the primary thing. The primary thing is you are here to serve the Lord. Whether you be a slave or whether you be free, and whatever opportunities come your way. He said, you can become a free man. Whatever opportunities come your way, what regarding your situation, remember this. You are the servant of the Lord. That is primary. Christ's servant. That is our main vocation. That is never secondary. Christ's servant. Everything centers around that. The jobs you take, the places you go, everything centers around that. Christ's servant. So those two words, Christ's servant, that's what is to identify us. In the text, whether you were a slave or a free person, that's not what identifies you. What identifies you is you are Christ's servant. That is what is to define your life. One person may sell insurance. Another person may be a plumber. Another person may be a receptionist. People are different things. But whatever it is, as God's people, we're Christ's servant. And we're to serve the Lord in whatever capacity we are in. That needs to always be upon our hearts. We are His servants. That is, we are to always be possessed with a willingness and a readiness concerning what He would have us to do. We are His servants. That means we're available to Him. Whatever our employment might be, whatever our circumstance might be, whatever the situation is, we're His servant. We're to be available to Him. And we are to be submissive to His rules, to His ways, to His interests. That is to be our intention. That is to be our desire. That is to be the priority. We are His servants. As such, whether we be a receptionist, a plumber, whatever, we are to be earnest, we are to be diligent, and fully committed to Him. To Him. The position in life plumber, receptionist, teacher, whatever, is not the main thing. That's secondary. We are His servants. And therefore, we are to give our utmost attention to Him. Nothing else is to to have overriding attention. Our eyes are to be open to Him. Our ears are to be listening to Him. And it is to be our plan to serve Him with our life, regardless of our social position. Plan to serve God. It needs to be our plan. We're going to serve God. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. That's a plan. That's my plan. Going to serve God. Nothing can get in the way of that plan. Nothing should. All other plans regarding marriage, regarding school, regarding work, recreation, travel, friendships, on and on we can go, are all contingent, are all submissive to this plan, to this main thing, to serve the Lord. So we are His servants. That gives us a foundation on which we are to base all of our decisions, all of our choices, and it helps keep everything in perspective. I'm His servant. I'm His servant. We are not left here to be the servants of life, but we are the servants of Christ in our life. Not here to serve life. That should not be a foreign concept to the saved by grace. But sadly it is. We that have been bought by God, sought out by God in the sewer of fallen humanity, reached by God in the depths of sin, rescued and raised by God from a spiritual grave. Certainly, we ought to have a heart for God, and He ought to be first. So we are His servants. That must be engraved upon our hearts and minds, that you may attend upon the Lord without distraction. I'm His servant. Well, what if such and such? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what happens. Does not change. I am His servant. I'm here to serve. Nothing changes that. And if that's always on our mind, then again we can serve Him without distraction. Verse 23, you're bought with a price. Be not ye the servants of men. In other words, you're bought with a price. Remember where your service lies. This needs to be, again, these are foundational principles. We are a purchase possession. Ye are bought with a price. Nothing changes that. Nothing that happens in my life changes that fact. It is a truth that must always be before us. 1 Peter 1, 18 and 19, the price of the purchase is stated both negatively, not with silver and gold, and positively, but with the precious blood of Jesus Christ as of the Lamb without blemish or without spot. So we're bought, we're paid for with the precious blood of Christ, bought by God, for God. And we read in 1 Corinthians 6, verse 19 and 20, you're not your own. Why? You're bought with price. To be our own is the greatest ambition of sinful nature. I'm my own person. Well, you're not. You may think you are, but you're not. You're bought with a price. You're not your own. And that truth is foundational to submission and service to the Lord. We do not belong to ourselves. Do we get that? Do we get that? We do not belong to ourselves. We need to always be mindful. We're always God's. We're always His. Doesn't matter what the circumstance is, you're always His. And you're completely His. No matter what. 1 Corinthians 6, 19 and 20, it is bought with a price to glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. And in our text it is, you're bought with a price, be not ye the servants of men. A purchased possession that must be engraved upon our hearts and on our minds, must get a hold of us. Why? That you may attend upon the Lord without distraction. Verse 24. Brethren, let every man, wherein he is called, therein, wherever he's called, abide with God. Paul says, whatever your position, whatever your occupation, whatever your status, whatever your circumstance, abide with God. We are His servants. We are a purchased possession. And we are to adhere to God. Let nothing get in the way of that. We are to cleave. We are to hold unto God. We are to stand by God. Continue with God. Remain with God. Persist with God. Abide with God. That is, stay close to God. Whatever happens, stay close to God. That's primary. That's never secondary. Never is that secondary. Stay close to God. Don't let anything get in the way of stay close. Remain connected. Be identified with God. Do we get that? Abide with God. No excuses. Abide with God. We need to always have that attitude. I've got to stay close to the Lord. Why? That ye may attend, be established upon the Lord without distraction. You stay with God. That's how you overcome the distractions. You keep that the main thing. I've got to stay close to God. Yes, it may be a time of sorrow. I've got to stay close to God. It may be a time of joy. I've got to stay close to God. In married life, I've got to stay close to God. That's primary. The other things are not the main thing. Verse 25. He says, as one that hath obtained the mercy of the Lord to be faithful. As one that hath obtained mercy. That must be engraved upon our hearts and our minds. We are vessels of God's mercy. In and of ourselves, fully deserving of God's wrath. But I am one that hath obtained mercy. That needs to grip our hearts. I am a vessel of God's mercy. Must never lose sight of that. Whatever causes sorrow does not change. I am a vessel of God's mercy. Whatever causes joy, I am a vessel of God's mercy. Whether single or married, I am a vessel of God's mercy. Whatever we buy and possess, I am a vessel of God's mercy. Why? Notice what it says. As one that hath obtained mercy of the Lord too. That's going to introduce the purpose of being a vessel of mercy. To be faithful. To be faithful. A vessel of God's mercy here upon earth. To be faithful. To be true. To be devoted. To be steadfast. To be dedicated. To be committed to the Lord. Always ready and willing to be used in His service, however He sees fit. It should always be our frame of mind. This is my responsibility, to be faithful. To be faithful. That's how we get to that you may attend upon the Lord without distraction. Got to be faithful. Let nothing get in the way of being faithful. Well, such and such happened, and that gives me a license to not be faithful. That thing has never happened, and it's never going to. You never have a license to not be faithful to God. Be faithful. That's our main responsibility in life. Yes, we have responsibilities as husbands and wives and children. But our main responsibility is to be faithful to God. Nothing is to override that. Verse 29. But this I say, brethren, the time is short. Need to be mindful of that. Time is short. I am here to be faithful to God. And the time for doing so is brief. The time for being faithful is short-lived. It's fleeting. Time itself declares this truth. The time is short. Life declares this truth. The time is short. Sickness and weakness declares this truth. The time is short. The grave declares this truth. The time is short. It's always so. Here I am, a vessel of God's mercy, here to be faithful, and I have very limited amount of time to be so. In other words, get serious. The time is too short to have other overriding concerns. The time is short. Verse 31, we're also reminded that the fashion, that is the ways and the methods and the various scenes and circumstances of this world passeth away. That which allures and entices the lust of man is fleeting. That's its nature. So again, here I am, a vessel of God's mercy, to be faithful. And this world, which so many of God's people are living for, passes away. Don't let the world, don't let the fashion of the world become the primary thing. Don't let it override. Don't let it distract. The world's passing away. The fashions of it, the things the world does, it's all passing away. None of it's going to matter. But this will. Whether or not we've been faithful to the Lord. He states this, the time is short, to set our perspective aright. We need to have a right perspective. There are spiritual and eternal things, and there are temporal things. The time is short. Serving and glorifying God in life, in all the happenings of life, wherever we may be and in whatever position we may find ourselves in, that's to be the business, that's to be the object, that's to be the aim and the priority of life, the Lord. And the time is limited. The time is fleeting. We must have a right perspective of time. We must have a right perspective of the world, that you may attend upon the Lord without distraction. So let's look briefly at the life that we're called to live. The life we're called to live, again, is summed up in those words, that you may attend upon the Lord without distraction. That is so in every position of life. That is so in every occupation. It is so in every circumstance. It is so in every pursuit. It is so in every endeavor. It is so in every aspect of our life. Life is not about life. Life is about God. It's not about time. It's not about the world that passeth away. It's about God. We must not lose that perspective. In other words, the main purpose of life is not life. The main purpose of life is God. It is not life that determines what we are to do. It is not life that determines how we are to live. That has already been determined by God. And we are to live what's been determined by God, regardless of what life entails. Our lives will entail different things. But regardless, the main thing is to serve the Lord. He's the main thing. The scope and the extent of the life we're called to live is the Lord. It's comprehensive. It includes every facet, every detail, every aspect, every happening of life. Nothing is exempt. Nothing is exempt. No facet, no detail, no aspect, no happening of life is to distract us from the things of the Lord. Then in verses 29 and 31, as we've already seen, Paul mentions some specific areas and events of life. And they are mentioned in the context of the time is short, the fashion of the world passeth away. And in all of these, we are to serve Him. In all of these, we are His. In all of these, we are to stay close to Him. In all of these, we are to be faithful. In all of these, we are to remember the main thing. Remember what it's all about. That you may attend unto the Lord without distraction. So he mentions married life in verse 29. And when it comes to marriage, our point of view, our frame of mind ought to be, I am a servant of Christ. Regardless of the health of the marriage, I am a servant of Christ. I have been bought by and for the Lord. I am His property. I must stay close. I must cleave to God. I am to be constant, true, devoted, unswerving, steadfast, and committed to Him. And I am to keep God the main thing. And such will keep marriage from becoming a distraction from the Lord. He mentions sorrow and joy in verse 30. When it comes to the happenings of life that will result in sorrow or joy, things happen that bring great sorrow. Things happen that can bring great joy. But regardless, they're not the main thing. Regardless, our point of view and our frame of mind ought to be, I'm a servant of Christ. Yes, I have great sorrow, or I have great joy, but that's not the main thing. I am His servant. I've been bought by and for the Lord. I am His property. I must stay close. And I must cleave to God. And I must be faithful to Him. Whether it be sorrow or joy, doesn't matter. Keep in mind, that which brought the sorrow is not the main thing. That which brought the joy is not the main thing. The main thing is the Lord and our service to Him. Keep the Lord the main thing. And such will keep the happenings of life that bring sorrow or joy from pulling us away from the Lord. I can't tell you how many times I've sat and listened to people say, well, I used to serve the Lord, but then this happened, and it just turned my whole life upside down. I haven't served Him since. You see what happened? They allowed that to become the distraction. And they act like the Lord just gives them license because such and such happened. My child died, and I just stopped serving the Lord. That's a terrible thing, no question. But you can't get stuck there. Our attention needs to be upon the Lord. When it comes to buying and possessing all earthly transactions, our point of view and frame of mind, I'm a servant of His. If I buy this, will it in any way distract me from serving the Lord? By possessing this, will it distract me from serving the Lord? If I take this job, will it distract me from serving the Lord? Will it keep me from being faithful in serving the Lord? I'm going to buy a cabin up north or down south, whatever. Doesn't matter. Only time I can use it's on Saturdays and Sundays. You better think about that, because that's going to distract you from serving the Lord. Nothing that I buy or possess is to distract from Him. In all worldly concerns, our point of view, our frame of mind, I'm a servant of Christ. I'm a servant of Christ. And I have to stay close to Him. And I must be faithful. That's my responsibility. Someone says, well, I have responsibilities to my wife, I have responsibilities to my husband, I have responsibilities to my children. All true. All true. But they're never the main responsibility. That's the Lord. That's the Lord. And there's a lot of God's people who don't agree with that. They don't agree with that. And they'll never serve the Lord like they ought to. We must attend upon the Lord without distraction. So the lesson of the text, I believe, is keep everything in proper perspective. Proper perspective is God is the center. Everything else revolves around God. That's proper perspective. The lesson of the text is, in all earthly matters, in all earthly situations, keep everything in proper perspective. Don't lose sight of that. He is exhorting and teaching them to develop and always maintain a proper point of view. To have and maintain a proper position in relation to the Lord, a proper purpose in relation to the Lord. To have and maintain a proper frame of mind. And that must be the Lord is chief. He's the center. He's the priority. He's exhorting them to have and maintain a proper intent. Our intent is, I must be faithful to God. He's exhorting them to have and maintain a focus upon the Lord. An overriding focus. It overrides everything else. It's not that other things aren't important. They are. But they don't override Him. He must be the overriding focus. He has to be first. He has to be first. Has to be foremost. He's exhorting them to undivided devotion to the Lord. Attend upon the Lord without distraction. Undivided. Nothing overrides it. He's exhorting them to keep everything in its proper place. Oh, the mess that we can make of our lives when things get out of place. He's reminding us that the spiritual takes precedence over the temporal. Takes precedence. It's not that temporal things are unimportant. It's not that necessarily sinful things. It is simply that we must realize that we must have a proper relationship between the temporal and the spiritual. And any time those get out of whack, you've got problems. You've got problems spiritually. Oh, that we be not pulled away by the secondary. Again, people say, oh, you don't understand how important this is. It may be very important. But it's not more important than the Lord. And if you think it is, you've lost your perspective. And you're headed for trouble. The secondary never becomes the primary. And that tendency is in all of us. Something happens, it causes sorrow or joy. And the tendency is that becomes more important. That becomes the primary thing. And it's not. It's not. And it's not easy. But if we keep these foundational principles in our minds all the time, I'm a vessel of God's mercy. That ought to keep us straight. that alone ought to keep us straight and keep our perspective right. But look, let's be honest. Sometimes we pay that no mind. We forget all about it. I'm an object of God's mercy. I'm a vessel of His mercy. And I am here to be faithful to Him That is our main calling in life. Again, one may be whatever, a plumber, a receptionist, a teacher, but that's not your main calling. Your main calling is Lord. And whatever secondary calling you have, you serve God through that. You don't neglect God because of it. We need to keep those things straight. God help us that you may attend upon the Lord without distraction. And you know what the biggest distraction is in serving the Lord? Ourselves. That's the biggest distraction we have. Just ourselves. These minds. It's the biggest distraction we have. So God help us. Brother Dave, if you'd come and lead us.